What's up, everybody? This is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga, here to bring you another video with no frills, just the analysis. You see the title of the video. You know what time it is. You already know what time it is, so let's go in. First of all, Totems. Larry Williams definitely gets the Uber Hikari seal of approval. For those of you who are hesitating, not sure whether you should spend your money, no wax sauce here. No wax sauce here, ladies and gentlemen. No wax sauce here. Awesome sauce. This is pure awesome sauce. So it definitely gets the Uber Hikari seal of approval. So go and buy the book right now. Pause the video right now. Click on any one of the links in the description box below and go purchase issues number 1 of Totems. That's what you need to do before you watch the rest of this video. That's what you should be doing. So my review of Totems. First of all, actually I don't even have the book with me right now, but I don't think it matters. Wait, let me go get the book. I think it does matter. All right. Yeah. So I want to show you guys this. All right. So issue number 1 of Totems. All right. So just to talk about the book very briefly. The book is nicely constructed. I actually like the book. It's not cheap. So, you know, Larry knows what he's doing. he didn't put together a cheap book. All the pages are very nice and tightly bound. The book is nicely tight and bound. The pages aren't flimsy. So if you buy a trade paperback comic book, you know sometimes the pages will be all flimsy, but these pages nice and sturdy, like the pages. Also, it's glossy, so you can really see the color. You can really see the color. So it's not, the paper is not flimsy. It's got the glossy feel to it, so you can really see all the nice colors. And it's just a solidly composed book. It's not by any means cheaply made, at least the physical copy. I haven't actually seen the digital copy, so I wouldn't know about the digital copy. But if the digital copy is anything like the physical copy, then I would assume that the digital copy looks well too. And also, I think um, Game Manic, forgot his name for a second, also mentioned this, but the back of the physical copy is kind of empty. It just looks empty, and I think Game Manic already mentioned this as well, that perhaps he could just put a quick synopsis on the back so that the back doesn't just look so empty. But other than that, I really like the way the book is made. So now let's talk about the artwork. The artwork is nice. Artwork is really nice. Let's see if we can. All right, so show you. This is the first page. The artwork is nice. It's some very nice artwork. So see that. I know my camera's like super duper clear. You can actually read some of the words on the page. But yeah, I really like the artwork in the book. And like I said, the paper is glossy, so it brings out the colors. The backgrounds are nice and solid. It's not a lot of empty backgrounds. Nice solid backgrounds. And that's really a hallmark of a nice comic. That the artwork doesn't have to necessarily be super detailed, but it's solid. Nice backgrounds, not empty backgrounds, nice colors, nice glossy paper to bring out the colors so that everything's nice and tight. And also, in terms of how the artwork is constructed from panel to panel, it's very coherent. The panels flow completely into each other, and it really complements the storytelling. So, just as a book itself, the book is nicely made. Also, the character designs, which you can see actually some of the character designs here. That's Carter. This is Nate Cross here, the black guy, and the guy at the bottom right there is Eddy. And I really do like the character designs. One thing I notice is that people will say that Nate Cross looks like Virgil Hawkins. For those of you who've read Static Shock or seen the cartoon series, you'll notice that Nate Cross and Virgil Hawkins look almost identical. I won't say identical, but they look fairly similar to each other. And at first I thought that maybe they looked a little bit too similar, and then I realized that the only reason why Nate Cross in the comics Totems looks like Virgil Hawkins from Static Shock is because Larry looks like Virgil Hawkins from Static Shock, and Nate Cross is supposed to be the comic book representation of Larry. So that's when I realized, yeah, so that's pretty much why they look alike. But my favorite character so far, my favorite character design so far has to be Carter. I think his last name is Deems. Carter Deems, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, my favorite character design so far is Carter. And the reason why is because I like the way his character contrasts are displayed physically. And here's what I mean by that. If you see Carter, you'll notice that he's actually rather buff. So at first sight you get the impression that he might be somewhat of a meathead, but he also has glasses on, if you can see, trying to get it out of the light. There you go. So you can see his glasses, which lets you know that he has a certain contrast and balance to his character. So although he's physically imposing as a character because he's so big, he uses his physicality in a certain way, and sometimes he uses that physicality as a way to stick up for other people, like Eddie in the comic books, and to show another dimension of his character, which is his compassion. So I just like the way his character comparisons and contrasts are shown physically through his character design. So I really like that. And then we have Eddie. Eddie just exudes that nerd image. He's got the glasses working. He's very demure, not very physically imposing. So he's just straightforward. Just has that nerd image. So a summary of what Totems issue number 1 is about. The story is very meticulously plotted. I must say that first off. No filler, very tightly composed, very organized, very fluid transition from panel to panel and from page to page. That's number 1. Number 2, to give you a sense of what this comic book is about, it's basically about 3 high school friends, Carter, Eddie, and Nate Cross, who are school friends, sort of high school friends and associates, and they're all having to deal with the pressures of young adulthood. So it's basically, in a way, a coming of age story, sort of compressed coming of age story. So they deal with issues of romance, like when we see Eddie and Nate talking about how Nate wants to go out with this girl. They have to deal with family issues, especially Nate, because as is revealed in the first couple of pages of the comic book, he went through a rather very traumatic experience, a very tragic experience where he lost his mother and I think his younger brother as well in a car crash. And he also has to deal with issues of bullying and peer pressure at school. So basically it just deals with how Nate Cross is coming into his adulthood, how he's struggling with the pressures of young adulthood, and how he has to find his identity because he has to figure out who he wants to be for the rest of his life, as all young adults know. And in the midst of this, the 3 main characters, Nate, Eddie, and Carter, develop these supernatural powers. They're called totems, and they're basically spirit animals that manifest themselves in all sorts of interesting ways. So each totem, which is a spirit animal, has a unique ability. As I think from the cover of the comic book, I think Eddie's totem will have something to do with some kind of mental ability or intelligence, something of that nature, because you can see he has the book open and he's got his hands on the book as if he's about to cast some spells or something. And obviously Carter, since he's all buff and big, is going to have something dealing with physical power. And I'm not sure what Cross's ability is going to be. That you can't tell based on the cover of the comic book. So, and basically as they manifest these supernatural powers, they're going to have to deal with a villain who's revealed in the very first couple of pages of the comic book. So now to get into my analysis of the comic book. I really love the beginning of the comic book because it does so many things very well. There's not a lot of action in this first issue, but the action that you do get is very, very impactful. So in the very first couple of pages, I think maybe the first 3 or 4 pages, the villain is immediately introduced, and through that introduction we get some insight into the villain's psychology and his motivations. And we know that the villain is not just a typical sadist or psychopath, because he's talking about things like conformity and identity. So we know that he has some deeper end game in mind, some deeper motivations besides just being a violent individual. And this really helps to set up the themes of the story, which will revolve around conformity and how the theme of conformity ties into the main character's search for identity as they progress through young adulthood and into adulthood. And one of the things that I really like is how that whole theme of conformity and identity introduced by the villain in the beginning of the comic book is really shown throughout the rest of the comic book via Eddy and the books that he's always reading. And this is how you know you're in the hands of a competent writer, because they always find a way to provide a rich context for the immediate action on the panel or on that page. And what I mean by that is that they can provide a subtext for the actions of the characters by giving you a certain context for understanding and giving you some insight into the character's actions. And that context is not just restricted to the panel or the page, but it permeates the entire issue or story, so that you get motifs. And that's very important as a writer and for a narrative, to have motifs and not just immediate action on the page that doesn't really tie into whatever else is happening in the narrative. And like I said, one example of this, one very good example of this, is Eddy and the books that he reads. So like I said before, Eddy's the sort of nerdish type of character. He's got the glasses. He's always walking around and reading these books. But it's not just the fact that he's reading these books, it's what he's reading that's so interesting, at least to me. One of the books that he's reading is Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche. And I know a lot of you, well, some of you who know who Friedrich Nietzsche is, this may pique your interest. And he's also reading The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Now, for those of you who don't know about Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, they were, well, Dostoevsky never really thought of himself as a philosopher, but in retrospect, a lot of people interpret his literature as having a lot of philosophical themes. And Nietzsche he never thought of himself as a philosopher either. It's kind of difficult to classify him, but we'll just call him a philosopher for the sake of convenience. So Nietzsche and Dostoevsky were Eastern European philosophers, and these were authors. Nietzsche was an author and he wrote philosophical texts. Dostoevsky, I believe, was just an author who wrote literature. But they dealt very intimately with questions of identity and moral choice. And I thought that this was a very cool way by Larry to kind of sneak this in there by showing us the titles of the books that Eddy's reading. And so it's a very cool way to introduce and provide a rich context for the exploration of the themes of conformity and identity and progressing through young adulthood and into adulthood. And so once you see the title of these books, you can start to see the sort of rich and multi-layered context that Larry is trying to build throughout the narrative. And I really thought it was very cool the way he did that. Very subtle and very cool. And this is frequently done in passing, so it's not a sort of issue. It's just the issue that he's reading, and sometimes you'll see the title of the books, or sometimes the librarian will remark, "Don't you think this is a little bit too far advanced for you?" Stuff like that. So it's very subtle the way it's included in the narrative, and it's the type of thing where if you don't understand who Nietzsche and Dostoevsky are, then it won't detract from your reading experience. But if you do know who they are, and you're able to gather what's going on based on who these authors are and the titles of the books that Eddy is reading, then it just goes a way to add an extra layer of depth and richness to your reading experience. And I really like the way Larry put that together, put those motifs together. And also, I love the way Larry connects the main characters to the villain. Very interesting way that he did this. Because like I said, the narrative starts with the villain being introduced and him killing somebody right off the bat. And then it just transitions very abruptly into Nate Cross having a nightmare. So already you see that he's sort of doing something with narrative structure here in the progression of the story, which is very interesting because the main character is not featured first, but rather the villain is featured first. And I like the way he's able to connect his villain right off the bat to his main characters and connect all of that to his motifs and foreshadow an impending conflict, and not just a conflict but an ideological conflict between the main protagonist Nate Cross and the villain. And right, and the way that connects to the books that Eddy is reading, because it ties directly into the psychology and the motivations of the villain. Because like I said, when the villain kills this person, he mentions right off the bat, you should not have conformed. And since Nietzsche and Dostoevsky deal with the questions of conformity and moral choice, it ties it together. Everything. It ties the villain, the main characters, and this whole thing together immediately and does foreshadowing all at once. So that was a very nice technique that Larry used there. And one thing that I'm really anticipating is not just the impending conflict between these characters, but the dialogue. Because the dialogue is quite good in this comic book. Very snappy, and it has the potential to be very good. I'm really interested in hearing the conversation between Nate Cross and the villain, because I'm pretty sure there will be some dialogue between them. So I'm really interested in seeing the direction in which Larry takes these themes of conformity and identity and moral choice through the dialogue between the villain and the main character. So that's something I'm really anticipating. And also another way that he connects the characters together that I found really interesting is that, like I mentioned before, the at the very beginning of the issue, the villain kills this girl. And so the villain and this girl are connected. And then, like I said, we have a very abrupt transition into Nate Cross waking up in the morning from this nightmare. And then when he's getting ready to go to school, the television is on, and the television mentions that there's a disappearance of this girl. And Nate's father says, "Don't you know that girl? Isn't she in your class?" And Nate says, "Oh yeah, she is. She's in my, I believe it was his American history class." So you immediately see how there's this connection being woven between the villain, this girl, and then Nate. So obviously the villain knows this girl, the girl knows Nate, and so it's sort of implied but not quite stated that Nate might know who this villain is. He might actually go to Nate Cross's high school, and I'm pretty sure that he does. And I think I have an idea about who he could be, although this character might be a red herring. Other things about the comic book that I like. I really like the way Larry has managed to create a life for his characters outside of the plot. Because we know that the bare bones plot is going to be a conflict between the villain, Nate, Eddy, and Carter. But he's done something. Larry is done something where he's created a life for his characters outside of that obvious conflict between the main characters and the villain. For example, we have Nate Cross, the protagonist, who's also a painter and an artist, and who uses that as a medium to deal with his emotions. And also, we have Carter, who's into video games and who also helps out on his family's farm. And then we have Eddy, who's into books and reading. So I like the way that he gives his characters depth by giving them a life outside of the immediate conflict of the plot. And that just adds a level of authenticity and a third dimension to the characters in the comic. And also, now that I think about it, in retrospect, I'm quite impressed with how much Larry was able to pack into this first issue. Because the first issue was only like maybe, I think, 33, 34 pages, something like that. And it's an incredible amount. It's an incredibly dense read packed into this. Like I said, the writing is very, very detailed, very meticulous, very compact, but it doesn't feel like the reader is being overwhelmed because the pacing is so balanced and so very well done. So that's another thing I like. One thing I would just caution Larry about, however, is I hope he's careful not to make Nate Cross too much of a brooding protagonist. Because right now, Nate has that whole woe is me feeling going on with him. He's dealing with issues of romance, he's dealing with this family tragedy, he's dealing with peer pressure, and he's not at that brooding stage yet, but if it continues along this trajectory, then he might become somewhat of a brooding main protagonist. And I really don't want to see him take that route. I want to see his character have more dimensions to him than just this pessimism and this brooding, because introspection is necessary for the psychological and ethical growth of a character, but you should always be cognizant of not having the character be surrounded by this sense of pessimism and brooding, because nobody wants to read it about a character who's always pessimistic and brooding in that regard. But I will say this about Nate Cross, and this is one of the reasons why I like him. He feels like me. He reminds me of how I used to feel when I was in high school and when I was a young adult. So that's I guess that's one of the highest praises that a author can receive is when they create characters that people can identify with and say, yeah, that character feels like me. He reminds me of myself, or I know somebody who's like this character. So I really like Nate Cross because of that, because he genuinely feels like me or somebody I would know. So yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts and my review on issue number 1 of Totem. So remember, if you didn't pause the video at the beginning, do make sure close this video out, buy the comic book now. The first issue was great. Awesome sauce. So make sure when you close out this video, you go buy the comic book. Like I said before, links in the description below for where you can purchase the first issue of Totems digitally. So this was your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga. Just brought you another video with no frills, just the analysis. Peace and have a blessed day.